I'm Teresa Au. Welcome to In the Making, where I have conversations with creatives, solopreneurs, and experts that explore the challenges and the rewards of the creator economy. One quick bit of housekeeping before we get into this incredible episode ahead. We have a listener survey up right now because we want to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about yourself so that we know who we're serving and what you're looking for from In the Making. Find the link in the show notes in this app here or go to adobe.ly/ITM survey. And to thank you for your feedback, we're giving away 2 12-month Creative Cloud memberships. So fill out the survey today for your chance to win 1 year of Adobe Creative Cloud. Thank you so much. Now on to our show. Artist, designer, animator, and tinkerer Kelli Anderson is all about transformation. Her paper engineering work is full of magical, tactile items like a book that becomes a camera, or a wedding invitation that becomes a playable record. It is absolutely amazing. Kelli's career has also transformed as the creator economy opens up new ways of connecting with clients, customers, and fans. Welcome, Kelli. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Our theme this month is transformation, which characterizes so much of your paper engineering work. What is it that intrigues you about turning paper into 3D objects? It's like one above origami. You know, I love origami, but this is another level.
Yeah, I love origami too. I think the thing that is so interesting to me about paper is that we live in this super high-tech context where we assume that paper can do nothing, but you can roll paper into a cone and make sound, something that you can control. You can use paper as an ingredient in a paper record player. And I kind of, I feel like at once like out of touch with my time, and then also kind of bringing back the exact thing that I think people need in this moment.
Yeah, I have conversations all the time with creatives, and many of them actually start with pen and paper, or pencil and paper, because it's the original way of creating art, I think. Before they bring it into a digital tool, they always start sketching, they say, in their little sketchbooks or just a piece of paper they find around. So I think it's so important. Tell me about your process. How much is digital and how much is it working with paper and scissors?
Yeah, I jump back and forth pretty radically between like analog materials and digital materials, and definitely believe in that idea that I think Robin Sloan coined it. It was like kind of like dancing the flip-flop, where you go back and forth and find new possibilities that don't exist in one realm or the other. So I kind of have to giggle a little bit when people ask me about my process, because it's very nonlinear. It's almost frantically, back and forth between those two realms. But if I were to work on a pop-up project, for example, I might start by looking at other pop-up books, seeing how other artists like use the basic mechanisms in that pop-up book toolkit, and then imagine what it could be. And I tend to start, like you were saying, the same way, where I am just working with paper and pen, completely unmediated materials, for bringing it into a vector application like Adobe Illustrator to draw exactly like where those cut and fold lines will need to be.
I love that back and forth. Your newest work involves risograph printing and animation. That sounds so cool, but I am not the one to describe it for sure. Can you tell my audience what that is and why it resonates with you?
So it looks like a copy machine. It looks like it would be super boring, but it's kind of like if you took a silkscreen studio and like trapped them in that beige box. So the process is most similar to silkscreen in that it's burning a stencil, but it's doing it in this kind of like fast food way. So with silkscreen, you need the silk screen, you need to burn an image out of it, and then you can press ink through it. And with the Riso, it does all of that like within the box of the machine, and it uses rice paper to create the stencil. It's a lot faster and more immediate. And so if you start printing and you're like, you know what, that color combination, the saturation isn't perfect, I need to tweak something, you can tweak it in your file and then send it again. And so it's really, really good for experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered this technique just by playing around with my friend's machine and wondering, would this be possible? Where I create animation frames in the typical way. I usually use After Effects, honestly. Sometimes I do like a Photoshop, like GIF. But then you can take those frames, you can arrange them on a contact sheet, and then you can print them out on the Riso. So the Riso has an 11 by 17 printable area. So just imagine a grid with rows and columns of frames. Once it's printed, you scan it back in and sort of reconstitute those frames, but they carry with them that little bit of like analog noise and wiggle and, you know, the little dots from the print releasing from the drum, the stray hair that fell into the printer. I like to say that it's a way of laundering animations that feel like too digital or too cold. And it's a way to make them feel like more organic, more touchable. And the Riso is so fun because it has all of these fluorescent colors and like spot colors. Cornflower blue, fluorescent orange. So yeah, it's fun. And I've been teaching classes online for a couple of years now. It's a weekend workshop and people come and I tell them they have to bring some kind of moving image, whether it's an iPhone video or an animation they crafted. And we prep the art together. It takes like 3 hours for everyone to do it on their computers. But then we'll print it in the print shop, scan it back in, and then they put it back together again. And like at the beginning, I was kind of like, because it's a technique I came up with, and I was like, what do I do with this? And it really has been so fulfilling to share it with other people and see what other people's spins are on it, and you know what potential people see in the medium. So I think that there's sometimes a tendency to be a bit proprietary about things, but I'm really happy that like, I opened it up because now I see that there's like way more possibility for exploration than I would have imagined if it was just, you know, me making it. So
yeah. There's nothing like collaborating and also sharing your process sometimes with others. I heard you say in interviews that writing about your work can help you find your next project. How does that work? Are you journaling or is it being published? Are you thinking of doing a book? What do you mean by that?
I was thinking in particular of the first project that got me into paper engineering, which was this wedding invitation project where we made a wedding invitation that was literally a paper record player. And it was one of those things where I was just following my intuition. You know, we thought, oh, this is cool. This will be cool. You know, that feeling, this will be cool, doesn't feel like a serious professional instinct, but it's actually like the thing. And I don't think I would have realized that until right after that record player project came out. I was asked to give a TEDx talk. And so I was like, all right, well, I really need to figure out why it was cool, you know? But it was actually really helpful for me because I realized that there was a whole lot of really interesting questions there that I had intuited, but hadn't explicitly, you know, written an artist statement about or anything. And it really helped me figure out like what I was doing and why it was important and helped me get to the next project.
So shifting to careers, I know you studied studio art and art history in graduate school at Pratt when you got to New York. What did you think your career was going to be like compared to how it turned out or where you are today?
I think in high school, I had seen some video about Andy Warhol living in an artist loft, you know, the factory, hanging out with the Velvet Underground with the Mylar balloons floating around. And I was like, I want to go to New York and do that. But I studied painting. I didn't really know. I had associated design with advertising, and I was like, oh, it's for advertising. I don't want to do advertising. So I think the most surprising thing about my career was that I'm definitely a designer, but I got 2 master's degrees before I figured that out.
Mm-hmm.
I had to get into the real world and realize that, oh, I'm not super interested in making really expensive one-off objects for rich people to buy. I'd prefer to make multiples. I'd prefer to make things that, can live online for free. It just seemed like a more hands-on and active way to engage with the world. I didn't want to hide in my studio for 11 months out of the year and then just come out and say, ta-da, I have a show. So
yeah, I also heard you speak about the difference between being an artist and being a designer, because people have asked you, are you an artist or a designer? Can you explain a little more about that?
I think the difference in being an artist or being a designer is almost like about the scope of the problem you're dealing with. So design is very much tuned into the specific parameters of a problem. Like if you're designing a pen, you're going to think about like, okay, how big is the human hand? How does it feel? What can I do to promote the ink flow here? And when you're an artist, it's almost like the scale of the problem is thinking about all of visual culture in this moment. And how do I react to that? Where do I find my place in that? I think my career is kind of interesting because I kind of do both. I get up in the morning because of the design part of my brain that I'm like, okay, here's a problem. I need to go at this task. But, there is an element in my work where it's kind of philosophical and I zoom out and I'm like, what is it that we're losing touch with as everything becomes like a little bit more digital and black box? And I feel like sometimes in your practice, it's really relevant what the distinction is, and sometimes it isn't.
Now, a big shift for creatives has been to move to subscription-based platforms like Patreon or Substack, where people can support your work directly. What is it like to create for your Patreon subscribers rather than for a client, let's say?
I keep a sketchbook. This was actually an idea that I'm stealing from Keisha Dean Dixon, who's another really great designer, artist type that I admire. But she was saying that she always keeps a sketchbook full of ideas, kind of like laying in wait for the right opportunity to come along, the right client project. And you pretend like you just had a lightning bulb moment, but it's really been sitting in a sketchbook for 5 years. I started this monthly mail club Patreon where people can sign up, and every month I make a different experimental project. And it's kind of like a way to metabolize that backlog of ideas. And the idea can be as simple as, I noticed that in this pile of translucent vellum that there's a really interesting like atmospheric effect when you print on the vellum and then stack it together. It almost looks like you're going through the fog. And so I noted that and I was like, oh, I want to do a project with that. I don't know what, but I want to do it. And so I made this transparent National Geographic where it feels like you're moving through the forest, like you're going through the jungle, like moving, away vines, and it's foggy and then it comes into focus.
Do you feel like you can do whatever you want, or are your subscribers coming to you for a certain thing when it comes to the Patreon community and the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, my most important consideration in keeping everyone happy is that it should feel like the price point makes sense. And so it's $24 a month, which, a book or a set of cards or, basically the types of things that I want to make like fall within that range. But there are definitely months where I feel like, oh gosh, am I sending enough? And then other months where I just completely blow the budget. So that's kind of the main consideration.
How big is your Patreon community?
It's about 400. And so there's usually about 25 that drop off every month and then 25 new people who sign up. And so, yeah, it's a lot of packages to bring to the post office. I just recently figured out that I can drive a car into the back of the post office and put things in a bin back there, which is going to make my life a lot easier because I was literally biking to the post office with a dangerous amount of packages.
Wow. Yeah. That's great that you figured that out.
Being an artist is a lot about schlepping things places. Like if any young
Hmm.
listeners are like, do I want to go to art school? Think about how much you like carrying things and make your decision that way.
I can imagine. Yeah. I think it's great to hear you talk about pricing because I know it's such a challenge for a creative business. It does sound like a bargain, $24 you said a month, considering how much work you actually put into producing the work and then schlepping, like you said, all of that to the post office and getting them out.
Yeah, it's not the most lucrative thing that I do every month.
So why do you do it? Why do you do the Patreon stuff? Does it bring you the most joy? It keeps your creativity going because you're doing those projects that don't fit anywhere and they're in your sketchbook, right?
Yeah, I'm doing it in part to connect with people. I really love mail. I love receiving things in the mail. I like the idea of sending people little surprises, like they're just like little gifts they weren't expecting. I'm also doing it because I need to construct some kind of system for myself this year to make sure that I keep making new work and keep on experimenting, that I can't rely on the external pressure of a job to do that. I think I'm going to look back and be proud of what I created. There's definitely a wide diversity of things I'm able to play with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to get into some things that are outside of that $24 price range, though. Like, there's a lot of materials I want to experiment with that I just are not on the table right now. So,
You're doing so much. You just mentioned client work, your Patreon, you're also an author, you write books, you speak, you teach. What is your ideal mix of the type of work that will fill your days?
yeah, I mean, I get really bored if I'm doing the same thing over and over again. Even the same work. I really like the uncertainty of, will this work? If I don't have that question to motivate me, it's really hard for me to want to work on something. That is not a good business plan. It's a lot better to get really good at like a certain style and then have people come to you for that style. It's also a good business plan to have a variety of activities that you use to make your life work. So
Mm-hmm.
there are some years where I'm asked to give so many talks. And so that's income and that's great. But then there are other years where that doesn't happen. And I never want to find myself like in sort of like a panic that something has dried up. I've noticed that it kind of becomes kind of like a cyclical thing where
Mm-hmm.
when it rains, it pours. When I get client work, it seems like everyone wants me to work on something. I'm kind of like cramming in those projects, the book writing, the teaching, I'm cramming them into the negative space where other things aren't happening.
Yeah, it sounds like you're very flexible. And I think most artists are. They kind of go with the flow and create their own opportunities as well. I'm thinking about what you said about using Patreon to connect with people. What is your approach to social media? Because that's also a way to connect with people. I'm guessing you're not really the type to schedule posts and optimize for algorithms, unless I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the algorithm is definitely frustrating. So I think all of us feel like a little bit disempowered by social media right now because the algorithm's more heavy-handed than it used to be. I need to figure out how to schedule posts. Honestly, like I haven't done that yet, but I notice when I post in the morning, more people see it. So need to get on that scheduling post things. I think I use Instagram a lot like other creative people do, in that I'll post things to my main page that are kind of like portfolio content. And then in stories, I just post anything I pass. I'm like, oh, it's an interesting ripped up poster on the subway, or I heard the song I liked, or my cat's doing something funny. I don't filter that much.
How do you feel about the pressure to always be online or be online more?
I think that I'm kind of lucky in that I've been lucky enough to have kind of like a long career. And so I've noticed that you can go away and come back and people will return to you. It's a little bit disheartening because I know if you're not on Instagram, for example, for a while, and then you post, they tend to not reward you for staying away. So there's, really, it's not your imagination. It's definitely built into the apps that they want you to be there. They want to participate. They're going to reward people who post consistently and post consistent content. But that doesn't mean you have to live your life that way. And, ultimately, what keeps you happy and what keeps you fulfilled as a creative person is the thing that's going to prevail in the long run. And so if you need to take a break off of social media for, a month, 2 months, and just go draw trees or something, that's something you can do.
Do you want comments, or what are you looking for in terms of engagement?
Well, I'm kind of looking to just connect with kindred spirits. Sometimes I post things and people want to chit chat a lot about it. And that's always fun. It just feels social, it feels like going to a gallery show and just talking to people. So I like that.
So along those lines, do you have any other designer friends you connect with, or a team behind the scenes?
I feel like I have a pretty good community in Brooklyn. I really like the community that comes from holding a class, that you can kind of create a space where people feel comfortable to experiment, comfortable to have new ideas and new opinions, explore different aspects of themselves and their creative practice. Finding your people is we don't talk about this a lot, but it's actually really, really important to artists and to creative work. So for many years, I taught at a school called the School for Poetic Computation, which is an artist-run school. They're a really great space, and a lot of people who are interested in, the intersection of art and technology and design and culture. It's part of the reason why I live in New York, honestly, is because I want to be around people who, for whatever reason in their young lives were as moved as I was by the things I was reading in magazines and blogs and zines, the record covers that I saw, all the things that made me want to become an artist. I want to hang out. I want to find my people and talk to them about the things they're obsessed with.
Kelli, what is your next transformation?
I don't know exactly. I know that the next really big project that's coming out is a collaboration with Letterform Archive. It's a interactive pop-up book about typography and about how letters get their shape. Why do we have, the diversity of typefaces in our drop-down menus? Where did they come from? Why does, certain types of shapes and flourishes remind us of different time periods? So it's a question I had, and kind of coming at this with my art historian hat, is that we talk about that a lot with painting, we talk about it a lot with architecture, but we don't as much with typefaces, and yet they're potent containers of the zeitgeist of different eras. So it's a pop-up book that I think kids might like, but it's really written for, me, for adults.
Yeah.
But after that, I have a lot of half-baked ideas. I have enough half-baked ideas to last the rest of my life. I honestly don't know if I'm going to live long enough to get all of these ideas done. So I need to either start knocking them out faster or just, I don't know, clone myself or something.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I mean, some people have no ideas.
Honestly, it may be more that I'm just really into things that may or may not be possible. And so when you're working on something that's is this possible? Is it impossible? It's just failure after failure after failure until you finally I got it.
Yeah. Failure is always good when it comes to learning. I think it's a must.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, artists, especially artists, I mean, designers too, but artists to a large, I don't think that they have the same value judgment where they deem things a failure. I think someone on the outside can be looking at it and be like, oh, okay. You spent a year trying to get that to work. And, and I think artists call that process.
Yes, it is process. I love it. What is your one word for this year or next year, something that will guide and inspire you?
Awe.
I love that. Can you explain a little more about that word?
There are these two researchers out of UC Berkeley who are studying awe from the standpoint of psychology, and it hasn't been studied as much as other human emotions, but they're studying sort of like the evolutionary importance of it, why we have this emotion, why other animals don't seem to have it. And I really like this idea of awe as bringing on this sort of like feeling of vastness, but then there's this discomfort that like, oh, the world isn't quite the way that you thought it was. But it's something that I really find a valuable emotion, and I almost kind of like try to like chase it. And I have some projects in the works that if I could get them to function, then I think it'll do that.
Well, congratulations, because that is exactly the word or feeling that I had when I saw your work online, like that record player. I was in awe of how you did that with a piece of paper. So keep doing what you're doing. It was such an honor and delight to have you on as a guest. And thank you so much for your time.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you so much to Kelli Anderson for joining me today. I have never met someone so multidisciplined. I love that she's working in physical and digital spaces. And I also appreciate that she's all about discovering and trying new things. She doesn't have all the answers, but she delights in the process of figuring it all out. One quick thing before we get to the takeaways, we need a huge favor from you. Please take a couple of minutes to fill out our listener survey. You'll find the link in our show notes or go to adobe.ly/ITM survey, and you'll automatically be entered to win one of the 2 12-month Creative Cloud memberships. Thank you so much. Now, back to the key takeaways from this episode. 1. Follow your intuition. Even if it doesn't feel like a serious professional strategy, that's where your breakthroughs can come from. 2, keep a notebook full of your ideas because you never know when you can use it for a future project for your clients or for your own business. 3, teaching a class does 2 great things. First, it can foster community, especially if you're not living somewhere like Brooklyn. And second, participants can inspire you with new ways of thinking. Thanks for listening to In the Making, brought to you by Adobe Express, the all-in-one content creation app included in your Creative Cloud membership. If you like this episode, be sure to leave us a rating and a review and subscribe in your favorite podcast app. I'm Teresa Au, and I'll see you next time.